Today on Sports Central, we'll be going over our next final prediction of this offseason, and it will be over the New England Patriots. And this is a team that went 12-5 in 2019, and of course they made quite a few headlines this past offseason, with Tom Brady now being with the Buccaneers, and same thing with their former tight end Rob Gronkowski. But today we're going to be going over 2020 and whether or not this dynasty that has been for the past couple of decades can continue to thrive. We're also going to be going over your returning production and a full prediction on every game on the Patriots schedule heading into 2020. So at that, let's look at your season trends from 2019 for this team. Of course, they were 12-4 in the regular season and 12-5 overall. They ended up losing in the divisional round, I believe, of course, to the Titans. And so this was a team that was good last season, but they weren't as good as they have been in past seasons. Of course, they were 8-0 between September and October, and they were clearly the best team in the league for a couple of weeks in through there. And of course, they really dropped off at the end of the season, though. They were 4-5 between November and the postseason. So, this team dropped off quite a bit, and it's tough to say why that was. Of course, Tom Brady, I'm sure, had an idea that he was going to be asking for a trade or trying to leave New England probably towards the end of the season, so it could have been a motivation issue for him. But, I mean, no one's really going to ever know about that. But some of their key wins from last season, of course, they beat the Steelers in Week 1, 33-3. And that's when the Steelers were healthy, so that was a big win there. They also had a shutout against the Dolphins on the road in Miami, 45-0. And of course, I know it's the Dolphins, but with it being a road game and also having a shutout in the NFL, I think that's good enough to put as a key win. They also had a big win at the Bills. Of course, they made the playoffs last season, 16-10. Also had a touchdown win over the Eagles, 17-10. Then they beat the Cowboys at home 13-9 on November 24th. So once again, they did have a couple of good wins on the schedule, and of course they were much better between September and October. But still, this was an all-around good team last season. As far as your returning production goes, of course your star quarterback Tom Brady is now with Tampa Bay. I'm sure pretty much everyone knows about that now. And it looks like your quarterback's going to be Jarrett Stidham for next season. Of course, he's out of Auburn, and I believe he was drafted just a couple of seasons ago. So it's really tough to say whether or not he's going to be a good quarterback, but he has been good in the past, especially for Auburn. So, it'll be interesting to see how he does for sure. We had Tom Brady last season. He did decline a little bit compared to how he's been in the past. He still put up over 4,000 yards of passing with 24 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, and his completion was not very good. 60.8% is what he had last season. So, I mean, with him getting older, of course, I mean, that's kind of bound to happen. But the big question is for him is whether or not he can improve that with Tampa Bay. Of course, he's declined a little bit over the past couple of seasons, and that's been evident, especially by fantasy football. I mean, if you're into that, he's definitely been a player that's really dropped off over the past couple of seasons. They returned their top running back in Sony Michel, which is going to be a huge return. Of course, he had over 1,000 yards with 7 touchdowns last season, and he had 2 fumbles. So, I mean, he was all around a good running back last season. I consider him to be one of the best in the AFC at least. They also returned their running back 2 and running back 3s with James White and Rex Burkhead. Of course, both of those running backs also put up some good yards, especially James White. He was right up there with Sony Michel. He had just over 900 yards with 6 touchdowns last season, and then Rex Burkhead had just right around 600 yards with 3 touchdowns last season. So, the running back core looks really good for the Patriots going into next season for sure. They returned their top wide receiver and Julian Edelman, which is going to be a big return as well. And he's been a bit injury prone over the past few seasons, so that is a bit of a concern for me. There was question at some point whether or not he would also go to Tampa Bay, along with, of course, Gronk and Tom Brady, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen anymore. I mean, it really can't at this point in this offseason, but he had just over 1,100 yards with 6 touchdowns last season, so all around, he also had a really good season. Definitely was Tom Brady's best wide receiver, and they didn't really have many relevant wide receivers other than him. Of course, their second wide receiver was Philip Dorsett, which he's gotten a little bit older, and he's had 418 yards and 5 touchdowns for last season. And of course, actually no, he's with Seattle. My bad. He's actually not with the Patriots anymore, so he will not be with this team, and he won't be a receiver for Jarrett Stidham. But I think all around, I mean, as well as the Patriots have Julian Edelman, I think this receiving core is going to be just fine. Of course, with Gronk not being in there last season, that had a very noticeable impact on this team. I mean, especially for Tom Brady, of course, Gronk and Tom Brady were a great duo, and it's going to be huge for them to be back together in Tampa Bay, but it was very noticeable last season for Tom Brady. I mean, not being able to have his star tight end is pretty tough on him. The good thing is for Jarrett Stidham at least is that he does have Julian Edelman, but he does not have Philip Dorsett. Of course, once again, he didn't have all that big of an impact last season with just over 400 yards, but still, it is a loss. As far as your other losses go, you lose your center in Karras. You also lose your defensive tackle, Shelton. Same with your defensive end, Michael Bennett. And then you also lose your linebacker in Roberts and then your linebacker Van Noy. So this linebacking core is taking a couple of hits and they're losing a couple of players, but they're also getting a couple of big additions too, as they've signed Marquise Lee. So that's going to be big for Jarrett Stidham to have. And I'm honestly, in my opinion, Marquise Lee has got much more upside than Philip Dorsett has. So I think they're going to be in a better situation with Marquise Lee in there. And of course, they also bring in their safety, Adrian Phillips, and he was a great safety in the past few years. So that's going to be a big addition for the Patriots especially. Brings up the question, chances of another Super Bowl run in 2020 for the Patriots. Of course, this has been a nationally relevant team for a very long time. Pretty much ever since Tom Brady's been with this team, this Patriots team has been relevant. And I think that their chances of making a Super Bowl are very dependent on how good Jarrett Stidham does. I think in a quarterback, he's going to be good, but it's just tough to say whether or not the Patriots will be as good as they were, or good as they were with Tom Brady. Of course, it's tough to say. When you got a Hall of Fame quarterback like Tom Brady, it's just going to be tough next season, I think, for the Patriots. I don't really expect them to make it to the Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl by any means, but I do expect them to definitely be in contention for it. I don't think they drop off and have a losing season, but I do expect the Patriots. I think they're a playoff team, but I just don't think that they're a Super Bowl team next season. As far as your schedule goes, you start off the season on September 13th against the Miami Dolphins at home, and then you got a big, tough game against the Seattle Seahawks on the road. So that's going to be a tough Week 2 game. Definitely watch out for that one. But you got Las Vegas at home on September 27th. Then you travel to Kansas City for a big game against the Chiefs. And especially if the Patriots are going to be very relevant in the AFC, that's going to be a very important game against the Chiefs, because I expect them to be right around the top of the AFC next season once again. You got 2 home games against the Broncos and the 49ers, and you got a bye week in between those games as well. And then you got 2 road games against the Bills and the Jets. Then you get the Ravens at home on the 15th, another huge game there, especially if the Patriots at that point in the season are looking at the top of the AFC. Of course, I expect the Ravens to be way up there too, so that's going to be a very impactful one. Then you get the Texans on the road on the 22nd, followed by the Cardinals, and then the Chargers and the Rams in 2 consecutive games. And then you get the Dolphins on the road on the 20th right after that. And then you got the Bills and the Jets to finish off the season. So, for the Patriots, this team has to travel a ton next season. Just looking at some of these locations, you have to travel to Seattle, which is already across the country. Then Kansas City is a ways away too. And the Bills and the Jets, not all that far. But, if you look at the rest of the schedule too, they have to travel to Los Angeles and play 2 teams there. So they're going to be there for a few days. And then you have to travel all the way back across the country to play Miami on the 20th. So, yeah, for the Patriots, it's going to be a pretty big traveling season. But as far as your September and October and the early parts of November goes, I think that you go 5-3. I think you get a win against the Dolphins to start off the season, so you start off on the right foot. But that Seattle game, I think, is going to be really tough. That's going to be a quick turnaround, especially for Jarrett Stidham being a pretty inexperienced player in the NFL. And this team in general is looking pretty young next season, so that's going to be a tough game there. But you got the Raiders on the 27th. I think you bounce back with a win there. However, you lose another road game against the Chiefs on the 4th. I just think that the Chiefs next season and Patrick Mahomes are just going to be too strong for the Patriots, especially to have to play them at that point in the season. Then you get the Broncos and the 49ers. I think you get a huge win against the 49ers on October 25th. So that's going to be probably the Patriots' signature win, especially of the early parts of the season. And then you lose to the Bills, I think, on November 1st. You got a short week from the 49ers to the Bills, so that's already going to put you at a bit of a disadvantage. And I think the Bills in general next season could be a big contender, of course, in the AFC. And I especially think they've got a good chance to win their division next season, which would be huge. Of course, the Patriots have won their division for however many years straight, so that would be a crazy win for the Bills if they were able to pull that game off and let alone win their division. But I think the Patriots bounce back the next week against the Jets, and you get your first road win there. As far as the second half of your schedule goes, I think that you also go 5-3 in those final 8 games. I think you take a loss to the Ravens on the 15th, and I went back and forth on that one quite a bit. I just think the Ravens and Lamar Jackson are going to be too good for the Patriots next season. And I think they get a win there, and then I think they get a win against the Texans, though, so that's going to be a good win. You get a couple of good wins as well against the Cardinals and the Chargers. And I think you win both of your games in Los Angeles against the Chargers and the Rams. However, I think you take a loss at the Dolphins on the 20th, and that sounds crazy right now, but every team, I don't care what NFL team it is, they usually, almost every team has some odd loss down the stretch. And I think the Dolphins are going to be Patriots' odd loss this season. I think with it being on the road just after 2 pretty tough games against the Chargers and the Rams and having to have a quick turnaround, I think that Dolphins game is going to be really tough, and I think the Dolphins in general are going to be very improved next season. So I think the Dolphins can contend with the Patriots, and they get a win there. On the 20th, you get the Bills. I think you can take a loss there as well before getting a win against the Jets to finish off your regular season. So your record prediction for next season will be 10-6. As far as your prediction stats, you're going to go 6-2 at home, 4-4 on the road, and then in the division you'll go 3-3, followed by 7-5 in the conference. So all around, it's going to be a good season for the Patriots. And many analysts, from what I've heard, are expecting 8-8 to 9-7 as the overall record for the Patriots next season. And I think this team still has a ton of talent. I mean, don't forget they've had a lot of really good seasons over the past couple of decades, and they still have a lot of talent from those great teams. So I think that the Patriots definitely are in contention to make it back to the playoffs, which I expect them to. And, I mean, as far as winning the division goes, it's going to be tough. I mean, I think the Patriots lose both of their matchups to the Bills. And the Bills in general, I would say, are probably my favorite to win the division right now in general. I mean, with Josh Allen, who's definitely on the rise right now, and still a ton of talent on that team. And looking at their season, like in 2019, they made it all the way to the playoffs, and that was a huge achievement for that team. I think they just keep on going on the rise from last season. And I think they've got a good chance to win the division, and I'm not saying whether they will or not, but I think they're definitely going to be right up there for that position. But yeah, for the Patriots, 10-6 is going to be your record prediction. So I do expect a good season. I mean, for Patriots fans, I'm sure that'd be quite a down season, but still, I mean, 10-6 is not a bad record at all. Nonetheless, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this team. If you enjoyed this preview, be sure to slap a like on it and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel, and I really appreciate that as well. But as always, be sure to stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.